And good evening, everybody. It's Steve Schmidt here with The Warning, and I am thrilled tonight to be joined by veteran political journalist Ryan Lizza at Telos. I'd urge you to subscribe to Telos. There's some great journalism, some long form journalism on there about an incredible abuse of power by a MAGA lawyer. Ryan's entanglement in it reads like a novel. Today, Ryan had on Judge Michael Luttig, veteran federal judge, one of the preeminent conservative legal minds of his generation, and a deeply principled believer in the rule of law, the American Constitution. And you can see Judge Luttig and his appearance with Ryan on Ryan's podcast at Telos, and I encourage you to watch it because Judge Luttig is going to, in that podcast, detail in a way that's very accessible the lawlessness, the disregard for the Constitution, and all of those things. We're going to talk about that to kick off. I wanted to make one initial point here as we begin the conversation tonight, and it is I see one of our Canadian community members, and I was walking into a Canadian grocery store earlier, and every item in that store is tagged with the Canadian flag to indicate if it is a Canadian product. And the pride of the country with regard to its prime minister is palpable. And we're going to talk about Mark Carney tonight as a portraiture of leadership and the oppositional character traits that he has to so much of the Washington, D.C. Democratic establishment: smart, able, obviously non-capitulant. And I thought, and we'll start this, I do have one fact check in the old spirit of things that the prime minister said that was deeply untrue in this moment, and it's this. He said Canada is not for sale, and that is true. But then the prime minister motioned in the Oval Office and he said, some places are not for sale, but the American Oval Office is most certainly for sale. And Donald Trump is renting it out like a whore from an old West town, 1 shekel at a time, to every Arab potentate that can get a Bitcoin of them and down to Mar-a-Lago. It's an appalling ethical Armageddon and a corruption that we're witnessing that's just staggering. And I want to talk about that tonight as well. But I want to kick it off just about how you read that room, what went down there yesterday. How do you process what I observe as madness, insanity, incoherence, a portraiture of psychological disorder, of megalomania manifesting itself? Donald Trump surrounded by henchmen and sycophants. The Canadian prime minister there in a very high stakes moment that I think he acquitted himself with the highest degree of statesmanship. I have awesome respect for him, right? Maximum respect for Prime Minister Mark Carney, right? As a leader who defends liberty, defends freedom, defends what's right in this moment. And so, like, how did you read that room?
I mean, two things. I mean, Carney's election was propelled by Trump, right? It was propelled by anti-Trump feeling in Canada. So I'm sure he went in there despite all the bullshit that Trump has been saying and all of the nonsense about Canada being the 51st state. He went in there with political wind at his back. Recently elected, popular, whereas Trump is suffering from a cratering in the polls in recent weeks. He's suffering from hit after hit by federal judges around the country, declaring the, that his major initiatives so far are don't pass legal muster. And so I think that's the sort of setup. I mean, I think sometimes we think of Trump as this, you know, uh, titanic political figure because he's had this incredible comeback politically, and he's back in the White House. But he's not doing great right now, Steve, in my view. So that was the first thing is a politician on the up and one coming down, and the relationship between them is this Canadian prime minister has been helped by Trump's nonsense. um Carney was, a statesman. He didn't get into, it's amazing to me how these traditional politicians are able to not get in the gutter with Trump and not try and come into the Oval Office and engage in the kind of antics that he does. It must be, I'm sure it's very tempting for them to do that. He didn't do that. He made some jokes. Um, I don't know if you agree or not, but Trump kind of was a wimp about everything. I mean, he wasn't pushing him on this on this stuff. He made a couple of cracks about it. I mean, I think in a certain sense to me, it was like, oh, Trump actually understands how idiotic and juvenile the whole thing is, and he's almost embarrassed to really push it in front of this person. So that was that was my basic read on it. Is Trump is very conflict averse in real life, right? I think the the Zelensky meeting maybe was an outlier in that sense, but he doesn't like face to face confrontation. The stuff from The Apprentice was just bullshit TV stuff, right? Um, and so, yeah, that was my basic read on it. You are the Canadian expert here, Steve. You're there a lot, and you're now basically an ambassador to Canada. Uh, you're
Um,
when you go up there. So what was your takeaway?
well, listen, I crossed the border last night, and each border guard, at the, very professional Canadian Border Services, I apologized, uh, on behalf of the United States and let them know, American people are not behind this. I think it's outrageous. Um, you think about the World Cup and the comments about JD Vance, about the threat implicit to Ice Barbie, who, by the way, a raid at a Washington, D.C. restaurant in the footprint, really, of the White House, owned by the husband of the CBS anchor woman. Um,
That restaurant
few
is double
days
blocked out that
after
window, by the way.
60 minutes, raises the stakes, um, is deeply suspect to me. And so in this moment, I think that it's very important for people to see clearly what's going on. And what Mark Carney did is show the whole world how easy it is to manipulate Donald Trump and how incoherent he is, and whether the sycophants like Stephen Miller who go on and they say things on Fox like, well, look, I'm watching the Grand Chess Master. Um, right. You're watching a ship of fools. doing real arson. And so, with regard to people, as you cross a border, does Donald Trump, do not spend your money in the United States. Do not buy an American product. Send a signal. Tesla is collapsing. They cannot get rid of the Cybertrucks. He has $200 million of inventory, right? The company is on a path to destruction. And all of these things interconnected together will weaken core pillars of this movement. And we're seeing that play out right now. And it's going to get worse, right? Because what I wanted to ask you also is there a sense in Washington about that 7 weeks from now, there's going to be really a fundamental collapse of inventory in stores in a high consumption society? So there's going to be a lot of items that suddenly become scarce. Prices will go up. Jobs will disappear. And when you look at agricultural forecasts and some of this, maybe the inability to pick crops,
Hmm.
the inability to move crops to markets internationally, which has a real implication for long haul truck drivers, which is really the number one living wage job, right, for a non college educated white guy in the country, right, a core Trump constituency, right? All of this, as we move into the September, October, I think takes Trump down to about a 29, 30% approval level. This would be a historic low. We're at about 38, 39, hovering right there right now. I think he's headed to 35, and he's going to go lower than 35 and kind of arc from about. And
Here.
the accumulation of all of this is going to be really devastating in a lived experience for people. And so, how do you see that?
Look, I think you're right. I think the April market slide, which was scary and created a lot of bad headlines and freaked people out, and obviously damaged his polls, but it was not it was not anything that people their lived experience people weren't affected by it in their pocketbook. I mean, maybe their 401ks were affected by it, but you know, it wasn't like we were in the teeth of a recession, right? It was just a big warning sign from that market drop. And it absolutely, the bottom fell out of his polls to the extent that that can happen for any president these days. I think you're probably saying 29, 30%, because that's probably the sort of dead ender base that he has that will just never say they disapprove of him. And so I think you're absolutely right that considering just the freak out of what the tariffs could do, produced that kind of hit. The actual and remember, the market has recovered, most of what it lost. Trump has not recovered most of the polling support that he lost. And so at the actual economic effects of these tariffs, which we haven't seen yet, right? That is like a storm on the horizon that every day that he keeps these tariffs intact is more likely to hit landfall. So I completely agree with you. If you read closely, what you know, small businesses, large businesses, what's happening with shipping, and just the sort of uh, slow accretion of everyone preparing for, especially the China tariffs. It's going to it's going to hit, and it's going to hit hard. And he doesn't really have um, you know a plan to say, "Oops, sorry, these tariffs are gone now." I mean, they only just started talking to the Chinese this week, even though Trump said they've been in negotiations for weeks. That was an obvious lie. So I agree. I'm not a I don't make predictions about Trump and his support anymore because if I was doing that, I wouldn't be very accurate. I never thought he'd be in the White House again. So I'm always very cautious of those predictions, Steve. But um, I think it's an absolute fact that we have not seen the worst hit yet from these tariffs, and just the freak out last month produced his lowest approval ratings as president. So
Um, you live in Washington, and I'm genuinely,
you
I'm just
say
gonna role play.
you say that like it's
I'm
a
gonna,
bad thing.
I'm just gonna role play for a second. I'm gonna pretend I was in the U.S. Senate, right? And that I'm a Democratic senator, and we're having our caucus meeting. And what I would stand up and I would say is, ladies and gentlemen, he's not having that fucking parade. He is not having a Kim Jong Un celebration of himself using 6,000 active duty soldiers of the United States Armed Forces on the 250th anniversary of the birth of the United States Army. No, right? And all in and stop it, and would do whatever is necessary to obstruct the workings of government at every conceivable level, uh, from dawn to dusk, around the clock, um, until it stops. And I just wonder why there is not anybody in the Senate that seems to appreciate that the moving of the line to greater absurdities, to greater desecrations of tradition, of restraint in a democracy, in a republic. Why do we have such a contaminated group of leaders that nobody, with very few exceptions,
Steve, you're cutting.
understand? Sorry about that. Seem to understand, right, that some fights come to you, right, and you have to meet them where they are. What is the strategic gap?
Well, I mean, this is going to sound like the real Washington answer, but I think you are confusing Democrats in the Senate for people who actually have power and influence. And I don't. I think there's this overestimation about what they can actually do. All right, that and not to go to bat for those guys, but I'm somewhat sympathetic to the argument of they've got to pick their fights and pick fights where they can actually
For sure. Can
do
they hold a
something. Not
nomination? Can they
Yeah,
stop a nomination, and for how long? So, for
well,
example,
they could do what Tuberville did last, in the Biden administration and hold up, military promotions that would be related to the military parade. I'm just thinking off the top of my head of what obstructionist techniques have happened
well,
in the
that's
last
those,
decade,
but those
but
military,
nobody wants that.
th- but why not?
Well, I don't know. I haven't thought this through. I think there was an argument against what Tuberville did. You remember this fight, right? Tuberville was
Right.
holding up all these military promotions that just the way they get passed through the Senate is on just a big, as a big group. Um, Well, let's think this through. If they did that, I mean, all the arguments they made against what Tuberville did would be thrown back in their face. And they would say what? They would say, yes, we need, this is necessary because it's the one tool. I'm just thinking out loud here, Steve, because
Yeah.
you've triggered this conversation. And let's think this through whether this would actually be politically smart to do or not. Um, they would say, yeah, this parade is a disgrace, and one tool that we have is we can hold up these military promotions. We support them. We but we need to make a stand here. I don't know. Would that sell?
Am I
It gain some.
wrong? Am I wrong about? I just want to make sure that I'm right about this. Right? They do so. The military promotions that were all Senate confirmable appointments.
Yeah, I'm gonna look some
Um,
of this up while we talk.
that the hold, right, the hold that they can put on is on any nomination. So any senator has the ability to say, I'm putting a hold on A, B, or C, right? It's not moving forward. So if you have 47 Democratic senators, right, 47 different holds, right, standing united on each nominee, like that they have that power to do that under the Senate rules.
I believe
As
so because yeah, I believe so because that Tuberville was able to do that in 2023. He had blocked. I'm reading a piece here from NPR. He had blocked all military promotions since between February and December of 2023, and he did it over objections to Pentagon abortion policy. So so that's a one man operation there. He was able to do that single handedly. So could they do that? Yeah, but what's is that gonna be smart politically to say
I
we
think,
is Trump gonna care? Does he give a shit
well,
about military promotions?
well,
Right?
the point is that it's all nominees across the depth and breadth of everything, everywhere, right?
But,
As
but but remember, with other nominees, you can't. I mean, you can draw things out a little bit, but nominees are not subject to the filibuster anymore, right? And so there are certain things Democrats can do to
but they
extend the.
still have the power of that hold on them.
I'm talking about other nominees. Yeah, if you're just talking about the military promotions, um,
If you were
yeah,
outside, does a Democratic senator, for example, have the ability to say now that Mike Waltz is nominated to be the UN uh, ambassador? No way, right? I'm putting a hold on him.
they don't because once look, he goes the process for these other nominees, the basic process for judges and for Senate confirmable positions now is they go through the committee process, they go to the floor, and then it's just a majority vote. It can't be filibustered, right? And I'm not enough of a Senate guy to know why the military promotions, there's something technical about that where one senator was able to hold them up. So but there is a distinction between those two things. But on the Waltz thing, they can't do it. This guy, Ed Martin, Steve, I don't know how much you followed the Ed Martin. This is a
Yeah.
lunatic January 6th who Trump wants to be the permanent U.S. attorney here in Washington, D.C. And, he was on a glide path until yesterday when Tom Tillis of North Carolina, Republican senator from North Carolina, who, every 1 in 100 times will break with like the absolute worst Trump policies. Tillis came out against Martin. Just shocking that he's the only Republican senator uh, on the Judiciary Committee.
This guy's a legitimate Nazi sympathizer. He's got legitimate Nazis around him that he's done stuff with. Weird associations, threatening to lock
Look,
opponents up, just off the wall.
this guy, the first thing he did as acting U.S. attorney was dismiss a case that the old U.S. attorney was prosecuting that Ed Martin, the new U.S. attorney, was the defense attorney on for a January 6th defendant. So imagine, Steve, you were suddenly given the power of a prosecutor, and you were previously a defense attorney representing this January 6th defendant, and you just killed the case. So that was one of his first acts. He was at January 6th. He has routinely described it as a day of, I'm paraphrasing here, peace and joy and love, and obviously celebrated Trump's pardons of all the January 6th criminals. And by the way, he has absolutely zero prosecutorial experience. If by my reckoning, he was perhaps in the top three, but maybe number one in terms of the most disturbing Trump nominees. If you get past like Tulsi and RFK and some of these others, but he was in that pantheon, and Pam Bondi, but really really scary because this guy was going to be the U.S. attorney for Washington D.C., where there is a just target rich environment of people and institutions that this White House hates. And we were looking at, so right now, because Tom Tillis did the right thing and said, I'm not a big fan of January 6th sympathizers. Um, it looks like Ed Martin's nomination is dead. He's still the acting U.S. attorney, but it's going to expire in a couple of weeks. Who knows? That's one to watch because Trump wants this guy in that position, and
Not going to make it.
I don't think he's going to make it now. Um, but you never know. Who knows if Trump goes to the wall for this guy and they find a way to get him to the floor. But they don't have the votes in the Judiciary Committee right now to get him out. And I don't think Senate Republican leaders really want to, send him to the floor absent a committee vote. But it's still possible. But he's someone that your viewers should keep an eye on because he's just an absolute worst of the worst in terms of being unqualified and having views that are just so out of step with what you would want in a U.S. attorney. So anyway, all right, I've got to brush up on Senate procedure
Right.
for you next time. So
Yeah, because my fundamental question, right, because it's deeply entwined with the politics, right, of the moment is, and I honestly don't know the answer to the question, which is, you can't filibuster a nominee, but a hold is different than a filibuster.
You can filibuster the way that like Cory Booker did, but
Sure, but not in an old school, not in an old school sense, right? The rules changed, and I got that.
You got to hold the floor. If you want to do it, you've got to hold the floor the way Cory Booker did recently, and so there's a human limit to that.
But I still wonder if there is and I have to find this out, which is, does a senator still have the power to stop a process?
They don't.
With a hold.
They don't. Or you would have seen it done with Tulsi Gabbard and RFK and Pam Bondi. They don't have that power anymore. You can delay things, but the majority in the Senate will get a nominee to the floor and voted on if eventually. So you can delay things, but you can't permanently hold them up. I mean, that's what we would call a filibuster. The talking filibuster still exists, and we saw Cory Booker use it recently. But you gotta do that. There's only so many hours you can actually do that for.
Do you assess strategically that in the strategy room that the strategy is maximalist? That we are 100% obstructionist, 100% of the time to assert our maximum amount of inherent power, as the Article 1 is.
So this is where I think you're getting at with these questions, and that the answer to that is clearly no, right? It's clearly no. And if you talk to the real nerds of Senate procedure, they'll give you a list of things you could do every single day, if you wanted to. And you're absolutely right that the Democrats in the Senate are not there. They are not there, and they're not there because of one person. Chuck Schumer. That's not what he wants to be doing.
I want to talk to you at another point in time on a disparate tangent of this before we get into your conversation with Judge Luttig about what I feel and know, and I think is deeply true in the moment, is really the fundamental corruption of the American bar in this country. And I think your story got right at that, right? And your long form about the abuse that you went through, the abuse that so many journalists are being threatened with right now in litigation, the capitulance of all these big law firms, their hollowness, their sleaziness, their transactional scumbaggery, all of it, right? And so one of the reforms, right, for Democrats, I think that bar associations, right, should be filled with non-lawyer certified professionals that are bound by a fiduciary responsibility, by a um, code of conduct. So, for example, you have a couple doctors on the Bar Association board, you have a couple psychologists, right? Anybody who has a fiduciary trust, you have some accountants, right? You have a certified board member training, but lawyers should not be judging other lawyers because in the obvious aftermath, if any of these legal codes of ethics mean anything, then people like Pam Bondi and Marco Rubio and others are going to be disbarred over the next decade, right? As it winds out through a process through some of the illegalities of actions. Because I believe the Constitution is the law of the land and it's immutable unless amended, and that we will prevail here, and that what's happening is, though an abomination, not unprecedented, our lifetime. But I wanted to just ask you the highlight of Judge Luttig's comments, right? A preeminent conservative jurist. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Judge Luttig, who he is, why he matters, and really the
Yeah.
crux of what he said today?
Well, I bet a lot of our viewers will remember Judge Luttig from his testimony before the January 6th committee in June 2022. He gave an incredibly powerful statement that day, and has been someone who grew up on the American right, the judicial right, the Federalist Society right, someone who knows all of the most famous jurists in that movement, um, socially, personally. I'm talking about the Justice Thomases of the world. This is someone who clerked for Scalia. This is someone who Ted Cruz once said. Ted Cruz worked for Judge Luttig. Ted Cruz once said that he wishes George W. Bush had appointed or nominated Luttig to the Supreme Court instead of John Roberts. In other words, that was Cruz's statement of saying John Roberts was too liberal. We should have had a real conservative like Michael Luttig. And Michael Luttig, to his great, great credit, has been clear-eyed about the threat that Trump represents to democracy from the beginning. I think he's someone who has become more and more outspoken over time, peaking with his public testimony in 2022 before the January 6th committee. And he's written a piece that's coming out this week that is going to be just explosive. And I've known Luttig for a while now, and we were talking, and he started previewing the piece with me, and he was kind enough to come on Substack Live with me this afternoon and take me through what he's going to say in this article. And I'm going to start at the end of our interview, Steve, because I just think This line from Luttig, given his pedigree and his history, it just kind of unsettled me. Because I asked him at the end, what's your level of optimism that things will get better and we'll uh, steer back on course here? And he was pretty pessimistic, and he said this. He said, "It would be impossible to say after Donald Trump's first 100 days in office that America has a government of laws, not of men." This is a guy who spent 15 years as a federal judge dealing with some of the most complicated cases, especially in the wake of 9/11. Deeply serious person. And for him to reach that conclusion is it's shocking, it's astonishing, it's frightening. And I don't think our current media environment and our current, uh, uh, public forums about what's going on have grappled with this kind of core fact of the lawlessness that people like Luttig see in Trump. I think people don't, people are still in denial about it. And I want to let me just go through what his sort of like main paragraph in this piece. And I might just read the whole thing, Steve. You can cut me off if it goes on too
Yeah,
long.
please,
It
please.
just this paragraph, which is going to blow up the internet. We're getting a preview of it here, compliments of Luttig, but this piece is going to blow up the
And let
internet
me
in the
let
next.
me just say, everybody, before you do it, Ryan, you find Ryan at Telos, Telos. Um, look up that word; it will take you down a enlightening path of some philosophical understanding. But go to Telos, subscribe to Ryan, follow him there. He's doing some great stuff. And over to you, Ryan. I'm looking forward to you reading this.
I liked Jeffrey Clark's comment there. He got the pun. Tell us. It's tell us news. All right. All right. To be serious here now. This is from Luttig's piece. This is him writing. This piece isn't out yet. We're getting a sneak peek here. For not one of his signature initiatives during his first 100 days in office does Donald Trump even have the authority under the Constitution and laws of the United States. And now he starts listing these signature initiatives. Not for the crippling global tariffs he ordered unilaterally, not for his unlawful deportations of hundreds of immigrants to El Salvador's squalid maximum security prison, not for his deportation of U.S. citizens to Honduras, not for his defiantly corrupt vow and order from the Great Hall of the Department of Justice to weaponize the department against his personal political enemies, not for his evil executive orders against the nation's law firms and lawyers in personal vendetta for their representation of his political enemies and clients of whom he personally disapproves, not for his corrupt executive orders against honorable American citizens and former officials of his own administration, Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor, a former DHS chief of staff who dared criticize Trump anonymously during his first term. Not for his unlawful bludgeoning of the nation's colleges and universities with unconstitutional demands that they surrender their governance of billions of dollars of congressionally approved funds, or his politically motivated threats to revoke tax exemptions. Not for his attempt to alter the rules of federal elections. Not for his direct assault on the 14th Amendment's birthright citizenship guarantee. Not for his mass firings of federal employees, not for Elon Musk and Doge's ravaging of the federal government, not for his threats to fire Federal Reserve Board Chairman Jay Powell, not for his unconstitutional attacks on press freedoms, and finally, not for his appalling arrest of Judge Hannah Dugan.
Here, here.
I counted that there's basically 16 policies he mentions in there, and he's not just like riffing through this, to be cute. These are 16 policies that he goes through and explains as a judge would why they have no foundation in law or authority under the Constitution. Um, and I don't know, it just blew me away reading this and listening to him go through that because I think so much of the conversation is, partly Trump's bad and things suck, but so much of the media coverage of this is like, Trump did crazy thing X. It's being challenged in the courts, but it's this kind of both sidesism without any clear statement of, yeah, that's illegal. Like, we don't need a lawyer to tell us, like, that's illegal. Like, uh, the, birthright citizenship, like we can all read the 14th Amendment. And so I think the power of Luttig and, his conversation with me today and this piece that's coming is just stepping back, looking at the last 100 days of the most important things that Trump did and explaining only like a federal judge can that the rule of law has just evaporated when it comes to this president. And this has been 100 days of lawlessness in his view. And I've known Luttig for a while. He's not hyperbolic. He's a really serious guy. And it took him a while to sort of, I think, get dragged into the to and fro of politics. It's not comfortable for someone like him, like a federal judge. And this is, to me, the most important statement I've seen by someone of his um, reputation and credentials on the right, explaining the lawlessness of the president. And he concludes with what I started with. It would be impossible to say after Donald Trump's first 100 days in office that America has a government of laws, not of men. So pretty depressing, pretty unsettling.
Sure is. A real time of testing ahead for the country, no doubt about it whatsoever. That's really an astonishing paragraph. Thank you for reading it. And again, everybody we got 1,500 Americans who could be doing a lot of things tonight, and more we'll see it when we release it. You can find Ryan at Telos, support good independent journalism. Because I want to tell you what I see at a strategic level, what I observe in terms of assessing the fight ahead. And it's this, that Survivor episodes, they are television reality show episodes, Malice and Toxic, but they are all laid out on a foundation of that the impossible could be so. We saw a glimpse of that yesterday during the Canadian insanity, never say never. And the answer is never, right? Donald Trump may sell the Oval Office, but the Canadian people aren't ever going to sell out their country to Donald Trump. So, right, off the table, never, never, ever, fucking ever, right? So it's not going to happen, just like the First Amendment is not debatable, just like the Fifth Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment. None of these things are debatable. The Eighth Amendment is not debatable, right? It is not at the whim of Donald Trump, right? The Constitution exists in perpetuity, and it exists in a form that, though it can be amended, it cannot be trifled with by whim. And so that proposition is being tested by really two forces combining, and it is the profit, the money changers, however you wish to see it, in the temple of democracy, that are complicit in the production of this sick show that imagines he has the actual power that he does not have. And this is fundamental, right? That any reporting, right, that disseminates, right, some of the biggest newsrooms in the country that posit, hey, can he do this? When he can't, on something that doesn't need interpretation constitutionally, they become complicit in the gaslighting of the country for profit, right? And so we see then that plus the capitulations, right, the get in line instinct, right, the cowardice in the Senate. And so in the totality of what Judge Luttig is observing, right? He's pushing forward into a very complex society where we have a lot of elasticity, more than most people imagine, right? Before he sinks into the sand and into the quagmire on this, because the American people are slow to anger, and slower to get involved in fights. But when we do, and the American people are, judging by the size of the protests and the building consequences. Like, what I don't get, right, is there's something that's happened over the last 15 years in the society, right? I'm 54. That's been a change, right? Very successful guy, brilliant guy.
Who was that? Wait, I lost you
And
there for a
we're
sec, Steve.
talking about
Steve, back
we're
up. Who
talking,
you? I lost you when you said right before brilliant guy. Was it some? Who were you talking about?
I was talking about a friend of mine that I was
Okay.
talking to, right? Brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant guy today, right? And this kind of trait in the society, right? That, and this is the part that I don't get. And we're talking about what's coming with the loss of shipping, right? As these right ships that are coming, right, with not with anything on them when it's and he's like and his response to it was, well, we'll see. And I said, well, it's not we'll see. We know, right? It takes a month for the ship to get here. You can look at data, people follow this, right? It's all transparent,
Yeah.
what's flowing around the world, and it's all in a state of collapse. I said, what I don't understand, I said, if you and I were like standing at the ocean's edge, right, and the hurricane was coming, right, and we're standing there with a beer, right, and it's like time to go inside, and I'd be like, the hurricane is coming, and would you say, we'll see? Right? Or do you know the hurricane is coming? Right. And I don't understand the interpretive aspect that is dominant in the media narrative where there's an inability to assert, right, what's happening in the moment with the clarity that Luttig did it. But the fact that Luttig did it, there is clarity now around what is happening that there should be points of agreement on. That is why those type of interviews and these type of long form formats are so important in this moment.
I love that phrase, this interpretive, what was it, interpretive instinct, interpretive, whatever it was, the gist of this like endlessly, this is a media, um, Achilles heel, so many of, and I've been there, I'm guilty of this myself. There's so much, um, there's so much weight placed on clever analysis and clever interpretations and counterintuitive takes. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I love a good contrarian counterintuitive take, but it gets pushed to the extremes where there's this sort of unwillingness to just state clearly the sort of not that there aren't complications in these things, not that there aren't, you know, um, other views to platform and to privilege, but there's just this unwillingness to be really plain about what's going on. Just to be like, the 14th Amendment says what it says, and the 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 a lot of journalists don't like to play lawyers because they think everything's up for interpretation when it comes to the law. But you can read a lot of statutes and just get the plain meaning. And there's just this like in the corporate media, there's just this obsession with everything has to have two sides. And if Trump does something, then there's got to be an equally good and smart argument for it. Um, and, just report out the debate. And it's just like blinding to a lot of media institutions these days who don't realize that these traditional conventions of journalism are being used against the media, and the media's obsession with overinterpreting everything, and giving the benefit of the doubt to the loudest political actor when they do something. It's all being weaponized against them. There are these media conventions that served really important purposes, but they're failing us now because they should be at the service of our principles, right? I always think of this as like we have two things in my business. We have our conventions and we have our principles. The conventions flow from the principles. If the conventions aren't any longer privileging the principles, then what the fuck is the point of the conventions? And so that's where a lot of journalists who came up in the traditional system are going wrong. They have this like anachronistic attachment to both sidesism and these old school journalist conventions, and anything that states clearly that one side is doing something more wrong than the other side, it seems uncomfortable to them. That can't be the case. That means they're biased or somehow partisan. And so it's a huge problem, Steve, and it's preventing the public from seeing a lot of this clearly. And that's why as you point out, when you see someone like an expert like Luttig put this all together in one place, it's like, yeah, why can't other people just make that case? Why can't they just say that clearly? Um, and look, that's one of the things I love about leaving that world, being on Substack. And there's a reason this platform and the journalists, a lot of whom come through your show here, it's a reason why it's booming, and it's a reason why people who are hungry to get out of the corporate media bullshit are coming here and looking for independent journalists. And so I appreciate you uh, pushing a lot of those voices. It means a lot.
Yeah, no, I am happy to do it. We have a budding economic calamity. We have a rule of law calamity. We have a growing international crises. We have theater of the absurd in the Oval Office. The Houthis are surrendering, and a couple hours later, they're firing missiles. We've had 4 incidents on the Harry Truman in the last month. We've lost
You
another
know,
$70 million F-18 that rolled off the deck of the Truman yesterday. Um, but we now see this crisis between India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers, that is escalating. Donald Trump was incoherent talking about that. We have a moral crisis, um, in that we have a real issue with an out of control jackboot federal agency that is acting like American Gestapo, not American law enforcement. It's unacceptable. It's outrageous. And that Tom Homan for sure will be tacked up on the American Hole of Villainy someday. Of that, I have no doubt, like all of these people. But in this moment, um, you have a lot of stories, and you have 39 Democratic senators sign a letter demanding insight and oversight over these detention facilities, including foreign black sites, where people are being shipped, detained, and apparently, according to reports, profoundly mistreated. And this is a fundamental issue, and this is the core issue that John McCain cared about,
hmm,
right? John McCain was the foremost champion of our age in many, many ways for human rights, for prisoners of conscience, prisoners of war, detainees in American custody, that they be treated with humanity. And the McCain argument was that what makes us exceptional was though that we could do it to them, we will not, because we are Americans.
Yeah. And
Took place between the Bush administration and detainee abuses and John McCain went on years. This is what I'm writing about tomorrow. And wrote about this extensively, and with his writing partner, really his brother, Mark Salter, talked about this not as a political issue, but a fundamental moral issue that defines who we are. Right? The idea that the American flag would be viewed as a symbol of fear by a 26-year-old Canadian actress trying to cross the American frontier, doing nothing wrong at all. And the sinister nature of the threats by the vice president with Kristi Noem, the sadism, the cruelty, where there's an embrace of a policy where the most powerful amongst us have taken the license to persecute the least amongst us with the cruelties of the meanest amongst us. And it is a abomination that John McCain would have thunderously dissented from the floor of the United States Senate, and would have argued with the deepest passion about the affront to the fundamental values of the country. And so, as we're moving ahead right into this political season, one of the things as we begin to wrap up the hour, Ryan and I are going to get together once a week in the evening, and we're going to talk a lot of politics. And one of the things I want to do is take everybody inside, right, the type of conversations that take place behind the scenes between, like, say, presidential level political strategist and a top level journalist about how do you see the field ahead? What is the pathway of these candidates in the Democratic primary? And I just want to close it out and say one thing before I turn it over to Ryan. And I just want to give everybody a point of view to think about with regard to opposition. I think that one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard is the dismissal of the energy and the necessity of the protests that are being led by Bernie Sanders and by AOC. And it is important to listen to the merit of what they are saying and to meet them not through the prism of the label, because none of these labels mean anything to me anymore. Right? There are people who appreciate this
such
danger
a
of
good
this
point.
moment as Judge Luttig does, right? And they're in defense of something that is sublime, that belongs to all of us. So what I would say is, for example, I don't know that I would ever vote for AOC, but I forevermore will be an AOC and Bernie Sanders supporter. And I'm a supporter of theirs because I admire their leadership and I admire their courage and I admire their vision of being able to see that what has developed, what has manifested, is something deeply sinister and insidious, and that the fundamental choice is grounded in liberty. And so the people that are on the front line of this, right, that are enunciating a moral prism that explains what's happening, whether it's Bishop Barber. I will have my friend Ryan Busey on. And so when you think about coalitions, right, Ryan Busey was the Democratic candidate from the state of Montana. And we're going to be talking about public lands. I want you to think about my friend Grove, who are going on every Monday into the Capitol to do Moral Mondays and pray. And each Monday, Capitol Police have arrested different ministers for praying in there. Cowboys in the West and black ministers together are a powerful combination, right? Because what they share in common as brothers and sisters, right, is a recognition of what's right and what's wrong. And so when you look at the detainees in American custody, the mistreatment that has been documented, the Senate investigation, the economic calamity, the international crises that are building, the rule of law crisis, we're in one of the great crises in the history of the United States, everybody. And it's going to require acts of citizenship. It's going to require you to be involved. It's going to require you to demand compliance with the cornerstones of our civilization, all of them invested deeply in the Constitution of the United States. So we there anything else you want to talk about with regard to tell us how you see it in DC, and talk about the next couple weeks, what you got to tell us. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining all of us tonight.
Hey, thank you, Steve. I'm very excited to do this with you every week. You're just judging from the comments. Your audience is terrific. I think our two audiences are gonna get along well. Please subscribe at telos.news. That's TELOS.news. I think your point about AOC and Bernie is really, really good. And Steve, I've known you. I don't know if you remember this or not, but we first met during the 2008 McCain campaign. You were on the bus. I was a younger reporter back then. I remember your fans will get a kick out of this, Steve. Back in 2007, 2008, the technology was a little clunky, and you used to wear like a big Bluetooth thing on your on in your ear. You had about the same amount of hair as you have now,
Yep.
and I think I said this to your face. I hope I didn't just say this like a jerk to other reporters, but I used to say, "Oh God, I hope I'm remembering this correctly." That Steve reminded me of the Star Wars character Labot, which is a kind of he had a very small role in I think the second, I can't remember now, but some of the Star Wars nerds will remember who Labot is. But he was a bald guy with a big headset on. And anyway, someone in the comments said that Steve Schmidt is someone you want in a foxhole with you, and I can tell you from personal experience that that is true. And so I'm excited that we're going to do this every week, Steve. On your point about AOC and Bernie, and I kind of went sideways here, but I met you in a Republican primary, and it's fascinating to hear you say that. And I think it goes for a lot of journalists too. There's you journalists have to get used to being comfortable with the fact that when the rule of law is under attack in this country, it's not a both sides issue. And you're not partisan just because you happen to line up with the folks who are pointing out that we shouldn't have people trying to tear down democracy, and that the rule of law is pretty fucking important. And maybe just one last thing I'll throw out here is a great quote from Luttig. I remember his testimony in June 2022, and I remember reading it, and this quote always stuck with me. He said, "America can withstand attacks on her democracy from without." see as helpless to withstand them from within. And I think the project of the pro democracy uh, movement. I'm not very comfortable talking about movements. I'm a journalist, but it's not partisan or it doesn't violate any of the conventions of my business to be proudly pro democracy and to realize when there are actors in this country that are um, trying to attack democracy from within. That's when we need the press at its fiercest, its most fearless and honest, and calling that shit out. And so I thank you for everything that you said to support the project that I've embarked on, and I'm looking forward to doing this every week with you, man.
I want to thank you for that, Rod. I do want to say one last thing. I lied. I'm gonna take back the last word because you inspired me to observe something, which is this. Um, I'm gonna tell you what I saw when I see a Stephen Miller peering over the couch, when I see a Christy Nome um, doing her sycophantic dance, when I see her little Eichmanns. And the man who interrogated Adolf Eichmann was named Avner Less. He was a German Jew, lost his family in the camps, and he emigrated to Israel. He was a police captain. He hid that fact, but he spent about 275 hours in the room with Eichmann, never talked about it to 1981. 1981, he's asked a question about whether his time with Adolf Eichmann had left an impression on him, and his answer to that question was it did. That it gave him his faith in democracy, because there are Adolf Eichmanns everywhere, all around us. We're surrounded by them, he said. But they're perfectly harmless in a democracy. But in a
Yes.
dictatorship of the left or the right, they turn deadly in an instant. And that's what these people are. Howard Luttig is a little Eichmann. Kristi Noem is a little Eichmann. Carolyn Levitt is a little Eichmann. This is a gaggle of little Eichmanns, and we are watching their snarling menace, their teeth bearing down, growing arrogant, more confident as the destruction they're doing is building. Their approvals are declining. And so we're on a collision course between principle and mayhem, between chaos and democracy. And the American citizen will have to defend the republic, and it's not for the first time. And the reality is there is no end of history. And the great lesson that we'll pass down to our children, their grandchildren, is there may come a day of peace and prosperity when everyone looks at the technology and the events in the world and all seems good and well like it did at the year 2000. And people will say it's the end of something and the beginning of a paradise, but that's an illusion, and that people mistake quiet for peace. And that's what happened. But now we are in the crisis. We're in one of the great American crises in the history of the country. As Ulysses Grant observed, there are people that are faithful to the project, to the cause of the American Revolution. There are people who have turned treacherous towards it. Those are the two sides in American politics. And within those two sides, there are appeasers and there are fighters. And this is a moment where you have to be a fighter. That's why you'll be for Mickey Carroll in New Jersey, running for governor, for Jocelyn Benson in Michigan, Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. These important people who are rising in the Democratic Party, who have fighting spirit, and there are more. We'll talk about them. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you all. Stay in the fight. Be engaged. We will win. There will be no civil war, but there's going to be an epic period of contestation and peaceful protest, a moral fight. And good night to you all.
Good night, everyone. Thanks, Steve.